We were in our comfortable but isolated prison apartment for 3 more days before there was a knock on the door. They had never knocked before, and we didn't know how to offer entry, but a screen lit up and told us to just say open in English. M said open, and a single apparently unarmed raider bowed before crossing the threshold. "Your colors look familiar," I said. "Weren't you on one of the screens during our presentation?" "I was indeed, Human J. I am Scree, the Praetor of Resources. From our communications, we believe your version of me leads what is called your Department of the Interior." "I thought you were afraid we might have bombs in our clothes," M said. "Indeed we did, but our welcome at your world has surpassed our every expectation. Your people have extended an unimaginable generosity considering how our species met. And your constructions are said to be awe-inspiring. We were very foolish to risk making you enemies, and so the two of you now have the same freedom of our world, and I am tasked to be your guide. Anything you wish to see you may see, anywhere you wish to go you may go. Anything you wish to ask will be answered if I can access the answer." "We don't even know where to begin," I said. "Truthfully, we know you closely explored the young world Seville, and our technology, like most of that in the galaxy, is almost exactly the same as theirs. We just use it a bit differently." "Tactics," M said. "Quite so, Human M. I have also been asked to mention that we know that you are the individual who single-handedly defeated our fold ship in battle. This act commands our deepest respect." She looked at me. "And Human J, we are told you are the individual who prevailed on your society to extend the generous offer of your help to colonize undeveloped worlds. We are afraid that this is a debt we may never adequately repay." "Never attacking us again would be quite adequate repayment," I said. "My advisors say your facial grimace indicates amusement. It is an amusing observation, but we are as fiercely loyal as we are belligerent, and we will not consider mere peace adequate compensation for what you are offering. We attacked you, and then we treated you rudely when you came to us in peace. We seek to rectify that. Do you have any natural wonders you are proud of?" M asked. "We have seen much on the planets we have explored, but on Earth we find that things like mountains and waterfalls and volcanoes and glaciers inspire us. As with the technology, these might be things found on many worlds, but your examples would be yours and worthy of visiting." So Raider N bowed, and we did a little pocket tour of Raider World Natural Wonders. Toward the end of the first day, I realized I had been hearing Scree periodically when she referred to her own world. "Yes, we are told you are also known for naming worlds in your language," she said. "Would you care to name ours?" "I've actually been thinking about it," I said. "I choose to call your world Kattegat. Is there any significance? 1,000 years ago there were humans who lived much as your people do, except without space travel it was other humans they raided from the sea. They are considered among the fiercest warriors our kind ever produced. Kattegat was the home village of one of their most successful leaders." N bowed again. "A name we accept with honor, then," she said. "How did your ancestors deal with the raiders of Kattegat?" "They were called Vikings. Our world was very fractured, still is actually, and different people reacted to them differently. The most successful offered them land to settle and the hospitality of neighbors. Within a few generations, nobody remembered that their ancestors had once been bitter enemies." "It is not just your constructions that are awe-inspiring," N said. "It is said that in our deep past we turned against ourselves as you describe, but with our curation we turned our aggression outward toward other races on other worlds. But your memory of that era is relatively fresh, and you have applied that same lesson to interstellar relations. We may have much to learn from you." We were in something like an airport, and another raider approached us. His gait was halting and his fur was spotty, and I realized he must have been very old. "I need to introduce you to this fellow," N said. "He is one of our most renowned artists." "If I may," the stranger said, "would you extend some part of your bare skin you don't mind if it might be stained for a few Scree?" Em and I looked at one another and she said, "Renowned artist, eh?" and stuck out her forearm. He applied a few dots of color to her skin. I followed suit. "I need to make sure there is no irritation, and that the removal process works as intended," he said before retreating. "What was that about?" M asked when he was gone. "It could be a very big deal if it is workable," was all N said. A couple of hours later, after we visited an active volcano and returned, the same individual returned and swabbed our skin with what smelled for all the world like rubbing alcohol, and the dots of color came off. He seemed very satisfied. "I will see you again soon," he said. "I did ask what that was about, didn't I?" M said. "He's an artist. He now knows he might have a canvas." The next day, N properly introduced us to the colorist. "You have probably noticed we wear colored patterns in our fur. We would feel odd, perhaps as you do without clothes, without these patterns. They honor our ancestors and our own accomplishments and proclaim our identity. Our colors give us courage in battle. O is our most senior and accomplished colorist. For years our top leaders would only accept color from him. Scree ago he retired and hasn't given color for many years. but he asked us for an audience with you. The old raider bowed and said, "I humbly request the honor of giving you color," he said. "It would mean a great deal to my people, particularly those who lost family on the fold ship Scree. Color honors the dead and celebrates victory. Color cements truce. We know your ways are very different, but for our own people, accepting color would be a great step toward unity between our species. So this is what the color daubs were about. Yes, I would not offer this if I thought it would harm you, or considering your ways if I wasn't sure I could remove the color after an appropriate period of time." "What would you consider an appropriate period of time?" "A day would be sufficient," O said. "If you are willing, more would honor us." "Well, I'm in," M said without hesitation. "What about you, J?" "I'm a bit reluctant to. If I might offer a suggestion, it might be useful for one of you to continue to exhibit your modesty habit," N said. "All of our people will be watching this, and most of them don't know about that." I glanced back at M and wondered if she realized she wasn't just offering to be naked. She was offering to be naked on planet-wide and possibly galactic TV. But I just said, "Could you just color the parts of my body I normally expose, like my face and hands?" "I can work with that," O said. Later I said to M, "You do realize that if they broadcast this globally, the chances of it eventually reaching Earth are something like 100%. She shrugged. "Sure, but I think one of us has to do it. And have you noticed that all the aliens we have met so far have ridged of bony members? If you go naked, I think you'll end up spending the whole show explaining how your dick works. And face it, when that got back to Earth, it would be a bit more humiliating than me becoming a pin-up model." 2 days later, we were standing just off stage as we listened to a Kattegat media personality introduce us. It was weirdly familiar, but also oddly nostalgic, because the large cameras and manual controls for everything gave the studio an Earth 1970s feel. We were given to understand that nearly everyone on the planet was watching, and there was a live audience of several hundred individuals. M and I both wore mics and earphones for the translators, which were powered by their vast and deeply buried supercomputer complexes, and M was naked to display the colors O had given her. "Our visitors from Earth," we heard in our earpieces. And at this cue, we walked on stage and bowed toward the host and then toward his audience, both in-house and global. As we walked on stage, a thunderous roar filled the studio. The audience were stomping the floor with their naturally hard-soled feet, and the floor was wood, so it made quite a racket. In fact, I realized that the entire building seemed to be made of wood, as were many of the other Kattegatian structures we had seen on our tour. Being used to our extensive use of wood on Earth, I had failed to notice how sharply this contrasted with both Seville and Pompeii, where almost everything was made of nanite matrices. "We have a very unusual show today," the host said with a flourish that could have been taken directly from Earth late-night TV. "Our guests tonight are aliens who crossed the entire galaxy to find us, despite having never ventured more than a few hundred light-years from their homeworld before. Our guests have only had the fold drive for a few years, and space travel of any kind for only a few generations. Almost within living memory, they did not have electric power or powered transport, yet today they cross the galaxy in craft they build themselves." There was polite stomping. "There are a couple of other things you need to know about our guests, who call themselves humans and their world Earth. As you can see from the female who graciously offered to wear and display colors for us, they have no mark of the Curators. Although the Earth itself was apparently curated, being typical of a world shaped to host life, the ancestors of humans themselves haven't been curated for some time. They have achieved all of their accomplishments without any of the usual help. No gifts of fire or agriculture or writing or steam power or electric theory, and no nanites. They had to build it all themselves. This elicited a different reaction from the audience, a collective gasp of surprise. I know what you're thinking. Nobody has ever heard of an uncurated species with language or civilization, much less space travel before. Well, we have now. Our first encounter with humans was with these two individuals, our present-day guests. This was their fold ship. On the monitors, we saw the broadcast image change to a picture of the grasshopper in space. The fold ship we destroyed must have gotten it to them in the last moments before its destruction. Another audience gasp. Kattegatians, this is the human fold ship's small hopping insect. This time the audience reaction was different still. It was bewilderment. Human J, you named this craft, didn't you? Would you care to tell us the significance? Certainly. Thank you for your welcome, by the way. Grasshopper is capable of taking off from the surface of a world, flying high enough on its air-breathing engines to fold safely away, and dropping into the atmosphere and landing with its air-breathing engines on another world. It doesn't need surface infrastructure to do any of this. At this, the audience started stomping. This was something anyone in the galaxy would recognize as extraordinary. There's much more, the host said. Being raiders, when we learned the humans were building craft like this, we wanted one for ourselves for obvious reasons. And what do we do when we want something on Kattegat? The audience enthusiastically shouted in unison, and the translator dryly said, "We raid." And that is precisely what we did. And you might wonder, since we crossed the galaxy to steal their technology, why M and J are sitting here in a broadcast studio instead of in a cell being interrogated as alien prisoners. The audience murmured in confusion. The small hopping insect wasn't just equipped with a fold drive. It was armed. While they were sleeping, it autonomously woke them up and warned them that we were coming so they could escape our surprise attack. And when we gave chase, well, Human M, this was your triumph, was it not? Why don't you tell us what happened next? M, who was naked in a building full of aliens, told them, "I fired on them with the sunlight cannon and fatally damaged their ship. As they fell toward the ground, since they did not have orbital velocity, my fold drive alerted me to anomalous fold activity, and I folded us out just in time to watch them fold the entire planet into its host star." The audience gasped, and there were some growls of anger. "I'm sorry about the loss of your ship and your people," M continued, "but I think your own people would say that if someone comes after you, you will do whatever you have to escape and hit back." The host made a gesture toward the audience, and they began stomping in rhythmic unison. Humans, this is how we express respect toward those who have earned it. The stomping turned more chaotic, like the applause we had heard earlier. And there is even more to this extraordinary story. The humans took the trouble to find us, but when our guests came, they did not bring their superweapon. This is what happened. On the monitors, they played the tape of our initial encounter after landing, when I told them the fold ship boxcar was a gift and that we wished to be allies. This left the audience staring in dumbfounded silence. Would you care to explain why any species, much less two individuals such as yourselves, responds to an attempt to raid and kill you with such generosity? I reasoned that if you wanted our technology so badly, you must have some good reason. There is no shortage of resources in the galaxy, but we knew from our short association with a couple of other curated races that there is a shortage of ways to reach those resources on worlds that aren't already developed. We came to offer you such a method so you wouldn't feel the need to try taking ours again. We knew it would be very hard for you to duplicate our industries, so we came up with something easier for you to use with your existing nanite tech. And so they did. As we broadcast, our fold ship Scree is in stable orbit around the Earth, and humans have been providing transport for our research teams for several days now. They have generously offered us everything we need to colonize undeveloped worlds on our own, without their future assistance, and to bring resources home in whatever quantity we desire. There was stomping applause, but I think still a bit of puzzlement in the audience. "Our away teams have sent us some holiday snaps," the host said, and I wondered what human had taught the translator that phrase. "Take a look." The first picture was of the Manhattan skyline. "This is just one human city," the host said. "Some of those buildings are over 80 levels tall. The tallest that can safely be built with nanites are about 20 levels, and those sacrifice a lot of floor area to structural support. There are hundreds of cities that look like this on Earth." There was stomping. "These skyscrapers are built on skeletons of pure metal." Switch to picture of a foundry pouring liquid steel. Humans melt and brute-shape metal on a scale that we can barely imagine. You might wonder where the power to do this comes from. Switch to picture of the Hoover Dam. Some of it comes from works like this, which exploit water pressure from hydrological runoff. Picture of conventional power plant. Most comes from these, which use fire to boil water to turn electrical generators. Picture of solar cell field. But while that technology built their society, it has created problems, and now much of their power comes from resources like these, directly turning sunlight into electricity. Picture of a windmill farm. Or wind. These wind turbines are miracles in their own right, almost as tall as the sky buildings, and they would be impossible to build with nanites. The audience was completely silent. None of this explains their aircraft or tiny fold drives, though. This is the other end of human technological prowess. Picture of the Boeing assembly plant with a couple of Dreamliners in the foreground. This place makes aircraft, which use fire to propel themselves through the atmosphere like enormous birds. So far, every human starship has been a converted aircraft. Picture of another large industrial building. This place makes electronic circuit wafers. Picture of the inside, with clean room protocols being observed. All dust has to be removed from the air, and the precision employed is unimaginable. Thousands of these facilities produce billions of products per day. We may lament our scarcity of resources, but nobody in the galaxy has ever seen industrial works like those of Earth. The audience began rhythmically stomping, the sign of respect. After the intermission, we will get more personal with these beings who crossed the galaxy to show generosity after we tried to kill them. "I didn't think you had a capitalist system," I told the host when we were off air. "What is the purpose of the break?" "We will show what I believe your people call public service advisories. It gives the away audience a chance to attend to personal business, and us a chance to make small corrections." While we were off air, the colorist O was escorted on stage and seated next to us. I hope your colors are wearing well, he said to M. Just fine, she said. We couldn't read the countdown, but the translator alerted us that it was nearing 0. Welcome back, the host said. We are now joined by one of our most renowned artists, the fur colorist O. Welcome back, sir. It's been a while, O said. It's been scree since you retired from offering color. I don't guess I have to ask why you came back. It has been many generations since a colorist has had the opportunity to color an opponent who defeated us in battle. Human M has offered me a great privilege, which I humbly hope I have fulfilled. Since you colored her whole body, I suppose you can verify she has no mark of the Curators. That is true. And in private, her companion allowed me to examine him too. We all know the Curators embed their mark deeply, and it is hard to completely obscure. We also have confirmation from the genetic scans they allowed at our request. It has been millions of scree since the Curators touched the human's ancestors. If I may take an aside, this privacy thing is interesting. Human J, you wear garments to obscure your body. Care to explain that to us? Our modesty habit goes back to our earliest history. On Earth, we actually have laws requiring the use of clothes to obscure parts of our bodies from public view. Whatever for. Well, clothing turns out to be useful. Like your fur colors, it can display status or personal style, and it can also protect against the environment. Because we wear clothing, we can comfortably live in some of the most hostile environments on Earth. And even in mild climates, our ancestors apparently found constant exposure to sexual temptation distracting. But surely that would only be a factor when you are in season. We have a rich genre of anecdotes about what a mistake it is to trust ourselves to do anything important when we are in season. Em and I looked at one another and couldn't help laughing. How often are you folks in season? About 1 month per year. Fortunately, we learned to stagger our seasons long ago using hormones, so we aren't all crazy and unreliable at the same time. Em and I looked at one another and broke out in giggles. Your expressions indicate mirth, the host said. What's so funny? Humans are always in season, Em said. Eyes went wide with astonishment throughout the studio. You mean that right now, the two of you could theoretically... There's nothing theoretical about it. But surely you aren't fertile all the time. No, naturally, females like myself are fertile a few days per month. But males are always fertile, and we are all always ready to mate even when the female isn't fertile. Our biologists believe evolution selected this for social reasons, but it became a problem when we invented cities. Most of our closest animal relatives are more like yourselves. This is amazing. I wasn't given this in prep. You built the most ambitious tech in the galaxy in just a couple of generations despite being constantly distracted by sexual feelings. Well, now you know why we normally wear clothes, I said. Some of the audience actually stomped at that. But you have agreed to be naked for us, the host said to M. We do understand this is rather unusual for humans. Well, it was necessary to give O a proper canvas. And honestly, I would feel a lot less safe doing this on Earth. Here I understand nobody is sexually distracted by my body. Not exactly nobody, I said with a small snicker. I plan to mate with you anyway, she said matter-of-factly. I don't need everyone in broadcast range getting the same idea. Wow, the host said. Well, colorist O, can you top that by explaining your designs? I doubt it, O said with a rumble we had been coached to understand was their form of laughter. I colored M's entire body, of course, and J allowed me his head and hands according to his race's more typical modesty habit. I started them both off the same with the burst of light on the upper right of the face, titanium white to illustrate the ray of their sunlight cannon. O motioned for M to stand up. Across the front of her body we have M's training. She is quite an heroic figure, having risked her life to test machinery that might not work. Human technology is so new that fatal failures happen with some frequency. And on her back the sunlight cannon hits our fold ship scree. In its death throes it transitions to her thighs, where I placed the streak of the small hopping insect's last moment escape, and the bright-rimmed blackness of destruction as the world beneath them was folded into its star. There was generous stomping. For Jay, having only his face and hands to work with, I also started with the sunlight cannon on his face. But in his case, his hands are green with life, representing the extraordinary human forgiveness and generosity, and the new potential for our own species which our alliance may portend. As an artist, I find it very beautiful that both of these outcomes emerge from the same violent origin. Thank you, O, the host said. For our last segment, I have a connection to our Praetor of Resources N, who has been escorting our human guests for the last few days. Praetor N, are you with us? So I am, a voice replied. The broadcast screens showed a still picture of N and a transcription in alien type, and M and I got voice translations in English in our earphones, as we were used to by now. Praetor, what is your impression of the humans? Well, I've only dealt directly with your guests, but I'm also in touch with our away team at Earth and can say they have seen much more than you have been able to show your audience. We are learning to melt metals, to make pressure vessels and precision bearings, and a few other things we need to make small, portable power stations. They have even offered to trade with us for these finished goods until we have our own manufacturing up to speed. So we anticipate that we will begin exploration not to raid but to colonize new worlds within a month or two. At this, the studio erupted in stomping, which the host allowed to go on for some time. The host and O even joined in the stomping. M and I bowed repeatedly, which we had been coached was the polite response to such praise. Finally, the host gestured for quiet. M and J, what are your own personal plans for the future? We had been hoping to go home with your fold ship, M said. But your security people had different ideas. Praetor N was still on the line. We did not know what our reception would be like at Earth, he said. If we had known, we would have sent you along. But if you do want to get home soon, may I offer a proposal? Some of us would like to try out your gift to us, the Fold Ship Square shipping conveyance. Would you be willing to take some of us home with you and show us how to fly it? I deferred to M, and she bowed and said, we would be honored. For a moment I thought I would be making some pancakes with M after we returned to our quarters, but it turned out there was a raider waiting for us there. I apologize for the intrusion, she said with a small bow. That's okay, we just didn't realize you would be here. That's because your hosts don't know. I know my colleague told you we walk among all of our children, even among the miscreants such as these, and some would say yourselves. You're a curator. Aren't the raiders listening in on us? Oh, of course they are, but it's trivial for us to defeat such measures. They think you are quietly watching a recording of your own show. To what do we owe the honor, then? M asked. There are those among us who think we should have revealed ourselves to our children eons ago. The argument against this was that it would break the stability of our galactic garden. But now that the stability of our garden is in jeopardy anyway, those voices are more active, and one result is that we are making these contacts with you humans. I believe my colleague imparted to Jay what a departure this is in all of our long history. So he did, I said. Of course there is a way for you to protect the stability of your garden. I believe he said you resorted to it in the distant past. If you refer to folding your world into your star, that is the last thing we would contemplate. Even the raiders do not disappoint us. The fact that they have managed to make so much trouble for the last 700,000 of your years makes them one of our more interesting families, and it's why we are inclined to forgive them this once for destroying our handiwork. Why do the raiders make so much trouble? Why do they raid? We developed their world because this star has what your people call sufficient metallicity to support complex life, but it and its system are deficient in heavier elements such as iron and nickel, which are necessary to make nanites. They had enough resources to build a civilization and get into space, but not to build an entire world civilization according to normal standards. You have probably noticed their extensive use of native materials for architecture. When they saw the works of our other children, they became envious and decided that taking was an appropriate way to augment what we had denied them. And we are giving them a great power, and we find it a very interesting development. You humans developed because we denied you gifts. The raiders developed because we denied them resources. You now offer them ready access to the resources they have lusted after for longer than your kind have existed, and you will find that they will probably repay you by forwarding a gift or two of ours in your direction. One reason for this visit is to assure you that this does not bother us. In fact, we are watching your relationship develop with fascination. It is so rare for us to observe a new thing in our garden. Well, it worked out pretty well considering the whole gunpoint and hostage way it started out, M said. I suppose it doesn't matter now to let you know that while we wanted to see how you would handle it without knowing, we were closely monitoring you all the way. We really were unsure how they would react to you, and from the moment of your arrival we had you in focus to fold you out of any situation that turned dangerous. You didn't need our assistance, though, and handled your introduction brilliantly. That broadcast was genius, and you wear Raider colors well, Human M. I had the best artist, she said. Indeed. I think I have made all the points I needed to, and you have a flight to prepare for. I know you are the junior species, but you have learned much more than most of our other children. Teach them with wisdom. And with that, the curator bowed and vanished. I don't think I'm ever going to get used to them doing that, M said. Then she put on her flight jumpsuit. The boxcar was not the same as it was when we left it. The raiders had installed 12 seats in the cargo space. The seats were made of nanite matrix and loosely based on the pilot and co-pilot seats, with safety belts even. But the makers had obviously realized their material was not as strong as pure aluminum and had thickened most of the struts. They had also plated much of the floor, even through the cockpit, which seemed strangely unnecessary. Raider P showed us the changes. It seems she was an experienced fold-ship pilot who was supposed to learn to fly the boxcar. M indicated that she would then be taking the co-pilot's seat. They looked back at me, and I claimed what would have been new Raider Seat 1A on a domestic airliner for myself. For the flight, we were joined by several Raider Big Cheeses, including Praetor of Resources N. It turned out the surface we had landed on was actually the roof of a fold power station, composed of thousands of internal columns where magnetic weights were continually dropped past coils and folded back to the top to generate electricity. The top was completely flat and smooth and several kilometers on edge. Praetor N was seated next to me as M taxied off. "I have been given to understand that your world is poor in nanite resources," I said. "This facility must have been a challenge to build." N appeared surprised for a moment, then just nodded. "We had to be very creative, mixing native resources in with the nanite structure and functionality in order to make it possible," he said. "Most races just sit the bucket out in a field and tell it to start building. It was much more difficult for us." M was pointing out instruments to P, and then she throttled forward and we were all pressed back into our seats. Then Boxcar lifted off and M punched us upward. "That was dramatic," someone behind me said. "You have done this before?" Praetor N asked me. "Oh, many times. We're used to it. It seems rather erratic." "Well, we're being supported by the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is erratic." We circled and rose as M showed more of the controls to P, and finally had P engage some controls on the new fold interface and punch the execute button. Through the windows we could see that we jumped upward about a kilometer. M hit the intercom. "We are now going to do a series of short fold maneuvers designed to limit the amount of your atmosphere we lose irretrievably to outer space in the course of leaving. We will fold, glide for a bit as the bubble of dense air dissipates, then fold upward again until the atmosphere is too thin to be worth bothering with. Strap in as we will soon be weightless." I made a point of checking my seatbelt but saw that Praetor N was just flashing what for a raider would be considered a wicked grin. The boxcar jumped and jumped again 10 times, and finally M hit the intercom and said, "Well, folks, we're in space now and we still have interior gravity. I suppose somebody did a few tweaks on our ship." "Just a little gravity plating," a voice behind me said. "Your specifications said its dead weight would be within the ship's limits." "And so it is," M said. "This will pleasantly improve our experience as we fall toward Neptune to adjust our velocity." Our outward trip had allowed M to calibrate the drive, so it only took us 2 more jumps to cross the galaxy and start that process. As she was showing this to student pilot P said something very loud in the growling raider language, which the translator reported as, "You have got to be introducing me to a coitally novel experience." "How so?" M asked. "For us to cross the galaxy requires at least 20 folds, each followed by a careful orientation to keep us synchronized with the map. Since the Curator map only shows developed worlds, we have to use them as waypoints. If we tried to do this all in one step, we'd end up hopelessly lost at the far end with no way to figure out which nearby star is yours. We might be off by dozens or even hundreds of light years. Well, our instruments are precise enough to put us within a light year or two if we're well oriented. They weren't calibrated well enough to do that on our trip out, but they are now. And if we're too far out for Sol to be the brightest star in the sky, spectra are pretty definite and we know our own home. You have the equipment to identify spectra on this tiny ship. It's even all automated. You just punch the destination coordinates in through that panel." M showed P how to do it. "And press enter." P pressed enter and we folded. The ship did an automatic destination scan, and after about 15 seconds it beeped. "About a light year off," M said. "See, there's Sol." There was excited muttering among the passengers. "Since it knows Sol's luminosity, it has now positively located and oriented us. Just press enter again to proceed to the intended coordinates," M said. "This thing doesn't even need a pilot," she responded. "Well, for folding it really doesn't. Our first fold experiment was a remote robot to remove the chance of accidentally folding Earth into Sol, and computers are better at this stuff than we are anyway." "Your computers might be," P said. "Soon we were falling toward Neptune to match our velocity to that of the Earth. Then it developed that having anticipated a much longer trip, the raiders had brought snacks. I was still a bit dubious about their food, although they said their genetic scan positively showed what was safe for humans to eat. But they also brought alcohol. The fermented beverage had a strange but not unpleasant taste, and I thought there would probably be quite a market for it on Earth. And with the gravity plating in place, we drank out of ordinary cups instead of squeeze bulbs. Once we weren't going stupidly fast, M showed P how to fold us over to Earth and make the fine adjustments so we could drop into the atmosphere. M herself landed us, showing P each maneuver necessary to do it safely. Once the craft was at rest, P said, "You have got to be drop out of the sky and bomb it, kidding me. There is no way I will ever be able to do that without wrecking the craft." "I wasn't born knowing how to land an airplane," M said. "We have classes. In fact, we have specific classes for this donor aircraft, the C-130. Get some pilots together and we'll train you as a group." The director was waiting for us as we exited the aircraft. The raiders went off to meet the others who had come before them on the fold ship. "We didn't expect you to bring it back," he said. "Well, I think the idea is to get them in shape to fly it back themselves. They're going to need some aircraft flying lessons." "I'll arrange it. By the way, those are nice tats, guys. I hope they come off." "Isopropyl alcohol," M said. "Over how much of your body?" 100%. He looked at me. Just my face and hands. But M looked really good on planetary TV, I said. I know I'm going to find out, but I don't think I want to know. Hey, it was fun. They don't see us as sex objects. I was just a warrior being honored the way they do it. For real. Okay, that must have been refreshing. Very, M said. Unlike the civilians, the raiders emptied their fold ship of all but a skeleton crew. And so they were all over the earth, auditing college courses and touring industrial facilities, and taking samples and raw materials back to their ship via our shuttle. A lot of humans took an interest in their rich lore of battle stories, and some of them became media stars. In turn, a few of the raiders took a deep interest in our history instead of our technology. And true to the promise we had made, we hid nothing from them. At one meet and greet, one of the raider visitors introduced himself to me and asked, I have been intensely curious to ask why you named our homeworld after a body of water. I named it after the home village of that Ragnar Viking guy, I said. At this, he dissolved into the apparent coughing fit I'd learned to recognize as raucous raider laughter. Ragnar Lothbrok almost certainly existed in real life, he informed me. But no town of Kattegat ever did. Kattegat is the ocean strait that separates Sweden and Denmark. Apparently, the people who made that entertainment show just liked the name, but it actually means small domestic animal neck, and refers to the difficulty of navigating the sea lane. Okay, so how did you find this out from 100,000 light years away? Oh, I just got back from Norway. By the way, the Norwegians all think you're an idiot. At that, we laughed and shared a round of drinks. They gave me a tour, he said after our first toast. At least you named our home after a very beautiful and strategically important body of water. I talked with him for several more hours. The raiders were as fascinated with our closeness to our own history as many humans were with their exploits as space Vikings. Em and I wore our colors for a month. After washing them off, we went back to what we had been doing before the raiders attacked us, scouting for new colonies and providing support for those already started. Raider Pilot P got her pilot's license and became confident enough to pilot the boxcar back to Kattegat. And soon after the first raider fold ship folded home, a new one appeared. When the news arrived 2 months later that the raiders had used the boxcar to set up their first colony in their part of the galaxy, millions of humans celebrated with them. 4 years later, our human form curator became a regular visitor to our house, particularly after Em and I got married. He revealed himself to the director, who in turn directed us to be his liaison with our species, and to keep it all very quiet. As far as anyone else knew, he was a human engineer who occasionally did contract work for projects at the base. There were now thousands of raiders permanently living on Earth, and hundreds of humans on Kattegat and its new colonies. While Em and I weren't the first human couple to exchange vows on another world, the raiders did offer us the opportunity to do it further from home than anyone else would for a while, on their newest and most distant colony. Being undeveloped, it offered us a honeymoon of exploring and sleeping beneath the stars, not too different from our experience when we first met the raiders on the occasion of their surprise attack. But now the raiders and humans were allies and trading partners, and our alliance was considered strong by both sides. The rest of the galaxy was mostly unthrilled, but there was a sigh of relief on the other side of the galaxy that the raiders didn't seem inclined to do much raiding anymore now that they had colonies. A few races had expressed displeasure that they were getting gifts of technology from US humans that nobody else enjoyed. And one race that in particular spun that feeling to white-hot hatred was the civilians, who now blamed themselves for discovering us and bringing us into the galactic community at all. The raiders had partially repaid us for our generosity with samples of gravity plating, but 3 years of research had made little progress toward understanding how it worked. Unlike the fold drive, which all developed races mostly understood, all the raiders or anyone else really knew about gravity plating it was that certain nanites made it work. So part of our trade was components and raw materials for nanite-based gravity plating. We were still nervous about setting up nanite-based manufacturing on Earth, where it might fall into unreliable hands. Our curator knocked precisely at 8 on Friday, as he'd been doing for over 2 years. It's easy to be punctual when you can instantly transport yourself to any place on Earth, or for that matter on numerous other inhabited worlds orbiting other stars. I received a communication today, he said as M set out dinner. One of our agents on Seville has been observing a construction project they are undertaking in orbit. It is unusually large for something that hasn't been announced to the general population. He used his hand to project an image on the wall of our dining room. It shifted, indicating progress over time. We are fairly sure this first stage is a fold drive, he said. But look what it is now becoming. The structure built around the fold drive was barely larger than the fold drive and its power source together. It had no windows or obvious bays. It was a tiny fraction of the size of any alien fold ship we'd ever seen, though still larger than most human fold ships. Yet it was taking on an appearance of completion. It did not seem they were planning to build it any bigger. They are making 2 of these. Sorry about the quality of the images, but even with our technology, these are still telescopic images from the ground. I wish P were here, M said. I'd have an interesting question to ask her about nanite-based fold drives. The curator smiled. Who do you think makes those drives possible? I can probably answer your question. The reason these fold drives can't be remotely controlled is that they have to be carefully calibrated to set the range and aperture, right? Yes, you have automated those functions, but none of our other children have ever managed to do that. But if you wanted to deliberately fold a world into its sun, you just massively detune it, right? You could automate that. The thought had occurred to us, he said, but we considered it so monstrous that we... M dove for the telephone and hit the top speed dial setting. Code Ternary Burn Omaha, get him online now, M said. A few moments later, Director, is the fold span limiter operating? Pause. Make sure it is online and stays online. This is the most important thing ever. I'll explain in a bit. Surely you don't think they would really... Those aren't ships, M said very definitely. Those are planet killers. If you are right, it would be unfortunate. M poured wine all around. Sure, I hope I'm wrong, M said, but I don't think I am. Remember, I have devoted my life to the arts of war, and Jay and I have seen what a fold drive can do firsthand. Humans may not have been in space very long, but we've been waging war at sea for centuries. And those aren't ships or even submarines. Those are torpedoes. Do the civilians know we have the fold span limiter? I asked, genuinely not being in the loop. Not by us, M said, and looked at the curator. I am pretty sure they don't know, he said. But I only found out about this business a couple of months ago. Our agent on Seville didn't realize the potential implications until then. This is still a very large project involving transport of a lot of mass to orbit. The nanite fold drive itself is a huge solid mass, and its construction is much of the difficulty of building even a normal-scale fold ship. To hide something on this scale from the local population is very hard. Our agent would have missed it if we didn't have a superior ability to detect fold activity. The question is, how close are these things to completion? We talked some more, and then the curator sat up very straight. I have just received a communication from our agent on Seville. The artifacts have disappeared, coincident with the unannounced departure of their fold ship Rate of Change, which was supposedly being refitted. That's the submarine, M said as she hit the speed dial again. Ternary Burn Omaha, yeah, I know, it's me again. Director, they're on their way. Is there any unusual fold activity in the solar system? Pause. Okay, we'll be there as soon as possible. What? An alien fold ship just folded into the Oort cloud. Looks like it's positioning to use Uranus for velocity adjustment. We need to get to the base. I can help with that, the curator said. Hold hands and stand close to me. We did as instructed. You might want to close your eyes. We did, and when we opened them, we were all at the base in a vacant office near the directors. Do what you have to do, the curator said. I'll be learning what I can. I'll be in touch. And he disappeared. I thought you were at home, the director said when we burst into his office. We were about a minute ago. Tonight is our meeting with you-know-who, remember? Okay, this better be good. Fortunately, the curator had flashed his images over to M's phone. There was an incoming phone call. They're at Uranus. Looks like they are aiming for low Earth orbit in about an hour and a half. How can you tell it's Leo? I asked. Why would they bother matching velocity at all? We can tell the vector they're choosing to fall on pretty accurately. We're not just sensing from Earth. We have fold monitors at all the gas giants. And this is a very expensive weapon for them to make, M added. They won't take a chance on it misfiring during a short flyby if they don't have to. They put a lot of work into this thing. We have to make sure that work comes to nothing. We've got an hour and a half to figure out what to do. Go blast them, one of the assistants said. They almost certainly have the sunlight cannon themselves now, M said. And their ships are a lot better shielded than ours by their sheer mass. Do nothing, I said. Everyone looked at me. We have the span limiter and they don't know we have it. They'll drop their torpedo and run, thinking it will obliterate us a few seconds later. Then we go up and carve the torpedo up at our leisure. I think this is the best strategy, the director said, and M nodded. It's also likely to confuse the attackers because they won't know why their weapon didn't work. So an hour and a half later, we were all still in place when the civilian fold ship Rate of Change dropped its payload in a stable polar orbit around Earth, and then folded off toward, as far as we could tell, nowhere. Seconds later, a klaxon sounded. Span limiter activity, one of the assistants shouted. What happens when the span limiter limits one of these things? I asked M. It depends on the fold geometry of the detuned drive. It could fold itself into the sun, or the fold could just fail. After a few moments, the klaxon blew again. It's still up there and it's retrying. Well, we can't just leave the fucking thing up there, the director said. Any ideas? It's probably otherwise unmanned and unarmed. I can take Grasshopper and blast it to shreds. Those shreds will still be the heaviest things that ever re-entered from orbit eventually. They could wipe out a city or start a tsunami. Well, we have the ability to manually adjust the fold aperture radius now. Use Grasshopper to fold the whole damn thing back to the Oort cloud. The radius of operation of the span limiter is only about an AU. You fold it too far away from Earth, it will fold itself and whatever folded it away into the sun, along with who knows what else. Plus, we can't be sure how its detuned fold attempts would affect a calibrated fold. Maybe we're overthinking this a bit, I said. Don't we still have hydrogen bombs? The thing is less than 50 meters across. We should be able to vaporize it. The director just looked at a guy in uniform who immediately said, "On it." "Sir, there's another problem," M said. "The civilians built 2 of these damn things. And you think you know what they're going to do with the other one? I would bet a huge pile of money it's on its way to Kattegat."